Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
We often talk about the police searching cars, searching vehicles, and so on. And one of the things that people often ask me is they say, Steve, what if I lived in my car? Does that change the status of my car? Is my car potentially my home? Because your home is your castle. And if you live in your car, does your car become your castle? And it's an interesting argument. And the Supreme Courts around the country, different states, have addressed this and talked about it from state to state. And I have a lot of truck drivers ask me. They say, police want to search my vehicle, and I live in there. So the home portion of the truck, for instance, is that my home? Wouldn't the same rules apply? So that's a different question. The real issue right now is that Washington State's Supreme Court has upheld a ruling that a homeless man's truck is a home. So he doesn't have a permanent home. He's living in his truck. Therefore, his truck becomes his home for legal purposes. This is from the Seattle Times. David tipped me off to it. Scott Greenstone wrote it. And in an important decision for homeless people in the state of Washington who live in their vehicles, the state Supreme Court has for the most part agreed with lower courts in a Seattle case where a homeless man's truck was towed in 2016. So the man's truck was towed, and he said, you can't treat it like it's a vehicle. That's my home. And obviously vehicles get treated a certain way when they get towed, but they don't ever tow away your home, generally speaking. In King County, where at last count, one night last year, there were more than 2,700 people living in cars and RVs, rules against parking on a city street for more than 72 hours were suspended at the beginning of the COVID pandemic. So you can park a car in the street, but if it's there for more than 72 hours, it's got to be moved. So a man named Stephen Long, who's a construction worker, he's been homeless since 2014. He took the city to court after he came home one day from work and found the truck he'd been sleeping in was towed. And by come home, he came to where his truck was. It was gone. He'd been fined more than $900 on top of a $44 parking violation. So they gave him a parking violation, but they also fined him. If he was unable to pay the $944, his truck, which was his home, would be auctioned off by the towing contractor. So he and his lawyers went to court on this and fought it all the way to the Washington State Supreme Court, who published an opinion on Thursday and said that they're going to affirm a lower court decision that the truck, in this case, was a home, and that auctioning it off would violate Washington's Homestead Act that forbids the state from forcibly selling someone's home. They can forcibly sell a vehicle. They cannot forcibly sell a home. If your vehicle is your home, it slides into the category of things which the state cannot forcibly sell. They also determined that the fines were excessive, and the city should have figured out whether Long could pay $944 before they levied those fines against him. And at the time, he was making between $300 and $600 a month. So the attorney for Seattle said this decision will have wide-reaching implications from mayors and city councils from every Washington city respond to people living in their vehicles on public property. We anticipate that elected policymakers will adjust their policies to align with today's ruling, and our attorneys will advise them as they make their decisions. Now, the new opinion was not as harsh on Seattle as previous lower court rulings, because the Supreme Court here found that since the auction didn't take place, the city hadn't violated the Homestead Act. They said the city had the right to tow the man's vehicle, but they didn't have the right to auction it off, but they didn't auction it off. So they're saying that towing the vehicle in and of itself was not a violation of the act. It also ruled that the city's fines were unconstitutionally high, and when they lowered them to a payment plan, they said cities can impose fines on homeless people living in their cars. So it's not a complete win. They're not saying that you can park your car on the street and live there and no one can touch your car. The city can tow your car. They can fine you for putting it there if you broke the law, but they cannot auction it off or hold it ransom to make you pay your fines. That's the distinction here. Now, the lead attorney for the man in this case believes the decision leaves the city unable to enforce those fines on homeless people's vehicles since there's now little monetary incentive for the tow company, because is the towing company willing to tow the vehicle and hold it, hoping these people pay their fine to cover the towing cost? Because the city doesn't want to pay that money. So most likely what's going to happen here is the city's going to stop having these vehicles towed. Just ticket them and see if they can get them to pay the fines. So the attorney asks, what are they going to do with it? Their tow lot will fill up with vehicles that can't be redeemed. And he said it may end a decades-running racket that the Seattle Times documented known as vehicle ranching. And that was the towing companies just going out and towing vehicles and holding them and saying you can only get your vehicle back if you pay some exorbitant towing fee. And if you don't pay that, we auction it off and we get paid. We don't care. So the whole question is, how justified is the underlying tow? This should stop the industry of constantly seizing and selling and reseizing and reselling and re-auctioning and making money off of poor homeless people living in their vehicles. That's the attorney speaking. Meanwhile, the man in this case is still living, but in a different vehicle, according to his attorney. He was saving for first and last month's rent at an apartment, but COVID-19 affected the construction and handyman jobs that he had been working, and so he's having a hard time raising the cash. So the man, Long, who's the center of the story, says, I feel it's great that I could help other people living in their vehicles. And this decision certainly will help a lot of people. So, there is an interesting twist to this because there are people who've lost their homes, but they have a vehicle. And if you're doing everything legal with a vehicle, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it might not be comfortable for you living in your vehicle, but it certainly beats sleeping on the sidewalk. So you're living in your vehicle, and somehow you run afoul of the local parking ordinances. So let's suppose that they say you can't park there for more than 72 hours. You're parked there for 71 hours, and you go out to do something, and you don't make it back in time. They come by, they go, hey, a vehicle's been here for 72 hours and some more. So they ticket your vehicle, and in the old days, they would tow the vehicle. And if you couldn't afford to get it back, they would auction it off. They'd pay themselves, and if any money is left over, they'd give it to you, but that almost never happened. Now, what they're saying is that if the city wants to, they can still ticket these vehicles. And theoretically, they could still tow the vehicles. But they've lost the big hammer they had, which was the threat of auctioning the vehicle off to pay off the ticket. So now if they want to, they can ticket the vehicle, they can tow the vehicle. They can hang on to the vehicle. They can store the vehicle. But there's no way they can force you to pay by threatening to dispose of the vehicle. Now, I suppose if we want to play this out in every possible scenario, and that's a symbol for possible scenarios, is the cities could take the cars, trucks, the homes, and hold them until they got paid. But then again, does the city have a impound lot that they want to run like that? Or were they using private lots where these people want to get paid, and if they know they can't sell the vehicles, they can't get paid? It's a strange situation, but I think the attorney is right, that even though, in theory, these vehicles can be seized and towed, they cannot be disposed of. So who'd want to do that? So it's a strange situation, and in case you're curious, the only way this could be fixed if you ran the city and you wanted to do away with this is you'd have to go to the state and get the Homestead Act they're talking about here repealed. And you'd have a hard time doing that because most people do believe that your home is something that the government should not be able to take from you in a dispute over money. So the idea that you're in your home and you're fighting something, the idea that the state can come by and seize your home and sell it at auction out from underneath you, most people aren't going to agree with that. So I suspect the Homestead Act ain't going anywhere. So it's a fascinating case, fascinating ruling. David sent it to me. Thanks a lot. From the Seattle Times and Scott Greenstone, who wrote it. Washington State's Supreme Court largely upholds ruling that a homeless man's truck is, in fact, his home. Questions or comments? Put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. There is no stress in the world, only people thinking stressful thoughts.